Hear me now. Let me tell you something important. When a man strides into a space, loud, abrasive, swollen with self-importance, that isn't true confidence. You see, genuine inner strength never needs to announce itself. Authentic power moves quietly, operates with genuine modesty, and offers affection without reservation or fear. But take a person filled with overblown self-regard, obsessed with gaining influence, addicted to absolute control, and I will show you someone who is desperately fleeing something. They aren't running away from the outside world. They are running from the very core of who they are. That is the essential truth underpinning narcissistic masculinity. It's not about achieving dominance. It's entirely about defense. Defense against deep feelings of shame, against confusion, against the sheer terror of being unsure of your actual self. Think about these kinds of men. They speak poorly of women because they are deeply fearful of their own tenderness and capacity for feeling. They relentlessly chase praise and applause because they are terrified of rejection. They meticulously imitate the image of a strong man because they've never truly encountered or accepted their real selves. And some are fighting a profound internal battle, not because of their sexual orientation, but because they have never found the nerve to simply be honest. Honesty right there. That's what authentic masculinity is all about. Vulnerability. That is the definition of real courage. And you know what? A man who cannot look straight into a mirror and speak the truth to himself isn't actually strong. He's simply stuck. So this conversation isn't about sexual preference. This is about deep-seated identity. This is about finding truth. This is ultimately about healing. Now, if you ever observe a man trying excessively hard to appear to be something, just understand that he is likely concealing everything that truly matters. Brothers, it's high time to finally stop the pretense. It's time to take off the protective mask, emerge completely from the shadow, and live like a man. Not a flawless man, not an arrogant man, but a real man. Narcissistic personality disorders. NPD is a complex and frequently misunderstood psychological condition that exists far beneath simple arrogance or an inflated view of oneself. Fundamentally, NPD has nothing to do with genuine confidence. It is rooted in a severely fragile self-esteem that has been constantly sheltered over time by layers of grandiosity, a strong sense of entitlement, and thick emotional armor. People who possess distinct narcissistic traits, especially men who display hyper masculine behavior, aren't necessarily powerful or proud in the way they try to present themselves. In reality, many are covering up a deep, nagging sense of inner inadequacy and emotional emptiness. This profound internal void often originates from adverse early life experiences, particularly emotional neglect, inconsistent affirmation, or being praised for performance without a real caring connection. A boy who grows up only receiving approval for his achievements rather than for the fundamental person he is learns a dangerous lesson. That love is conditional. If he is constantly instructed that he must be the best, must always be strong, and must never shed a tear, he starts to link his core self-worth directly to his appearance and performance instead of his intrinsic value. He develops a fabricated version of himself designed to survive in a harsh world, not necessarily to genuinely connect with it. This is precisely where the narcissistic mask begins its formation. As he matures into a man, he may learn to conceal his profound vulnerability under a dense shell of self-importance. He promotes himself constantly, demands significant attention, and harshly criticizes others to temporarily feel superior. But this feeling of superiority is hollow and unsustainable. Deep down, He does not genuinely believe he is enough. This explains why narcissistic people are often hypersensitive to any criticism. Even the smallest perceived slight can feel like a devastating threat to their ego because it risks exposing the very thing they are desperately trying to hide. The pervasive fear that they are on some fundamental level unworthy of love. This is why NPD is fundamentally a disorder of self-esteem. The narcissist depends heavily on what psychologists term external validation to maintain his sense of worth. They are constantly seeking adoration, not a genuine connection. They dominate every conversation, not to bond with others, but to keep the spotlight permanently fixed upon themselves. They actively avoid deep emotional intimacy because vulnerability feels like a risk that is simply too great to take. To be vulnerable would mean risking outright rejection, confronting the deep-rooted fear that they are not lovable as their true selves. Men with pronounced narcissistic traits, in particular, often tie their self-worth to rigid, socially defined concepts of masculinity strength, clear-cut success, high status, and sexual conquest. These symbols of dominance essentially become a psychological suit of armor. But beneath this surface, there is often an emotionally stunted boy who never truly felt seen or accepted, never felt safe enough to simply be himself. He learned to navigate life by diligently performing a strict role. And tragically, over time, he lost touch with his true, authentic identity. That's why it's a huge error to mistake narcissistic behavior for genuine self-love. It is absolutely not. It's far more like a draining performance intended to be a distraction from inner pain. They may boast, manipulate, or use immense charm, but these behaviors are not signs of healthy self-esteem. They are purely defensive strategies built upon deep-seated fear. The fear of being exposed, of being abandoned, or of being emotionally shattered beyond repair. The great paradox is that many narcissistic men appear highly confident, even magnetically charismatic. But it is vital to grasp that their sense of self is incredibly fragile and easily threatened. Their bravado is a shield, not a true reflection of inner peace. In reality, they are constantly searching for something. They can never find a stable, secure sense of self that doesn't rely on constant applause as absolute control or comparison to others. And until they genuinely confront the profound wounds underneath the mask, they will remain tragically trapped in a cycle of relentless validation, seeking, and pervasive fear of exposure. Hyper masculine behavior in narcissistic men often manifests as a psychological defense mechanism, not a natural or secure expression of identity. It is truly a performance, a carefully constructed display of dominance, aggression, strength, and emotional coldness, all meticulously designed to mask profound, deep-rooted insecurity. At a passing glance, these men may seem powerful, completely self-assured, even admirable. But beneath that exterior lies an extremely fragile inner world shaped by emotional vulnerability, significant identity confusion, and an unspoken, constant fear of being exposed as fundamentally weak or inadequate. From a very young age, many boys are forcefully conditioned to reject softness, emotional sensitivity, and genuine expression. They are taught that to be a real man means being tough, completely stoic, and always in control. Vulnerability is openly mocked, affection is strictly rationed, and self-worth is measured by strength, status, and conquest. For a child who naturally experiences fear, doubt, or sadness, as all human children do, this constant messaging can be profoundly damaging. If a boy is told that expressing these normal emotions makes him feminine, weak, or inferior, he quickly learns to repress them. He internalizes the crippling belief that his authentic self is simply unacceptable. And so he begins the creation of a persona that meticulously fits the rigid mold society has established. When that child matures, especially into a man with narcissistic tendencies, the emotional suppression doesn't vanish. It dramatically transforms. It hardens into a thick emotional armor. Hyper-masculinity becomes the elaborate mask he constantly wears to project control and confidence, all while keeping others at a safe emotional distance. The exaggerated masculine traits, the posturing, the obvious bravado, the obsession with dominance are not indicators of secure manhood, but rather desperate attempts to outrun the fear of being discovered as emotionally vulnerable or deeply confused about his core identity. These specific behaviors are not rooted in genuine inner strength. They are firmly rooted in avoidance. This avoidance mechanism is not always fully conscious. Narcissistic men frequently develop psychological strategies known as defense mechanisms to protect their fragile ego. One of the most common is overcompensation, where an individual acts in an exaggerated manner to counterbalance a feeling they harbor deep inside. For example, a man who feels internally powerless may become pathologically obsessed with exercising control over others. A man who feels deeply uncertain about his own masculinity may become hypersexual or openly misogynistic, constantly flaunting women as mere trophies or outright dismissing them, not out of true desire or superiority, but as a rigid way to prove a point to himself and others. His intimate relationships are not about connection. They are solely about securing validation and maintaining dominance. Many narcissistic men also display pronounced contempt for traits traditionally labeled as feminine. Not because they actually dislike women, but because they have been taught to associate emotional openness, empathy, and softness with weakness. These are the very parts of themselves they have forcefully buried. Seeing them expressed in others can strongly trigger their discomfort or even open rage. By aggressively rejecting these traits in the outside world, they further suppress them within themselves. This forms a psychological process called projection, a method for distancing themselves from the parts of their identity they've been conditioned to despise or fear. The identity confusion plays a major role in this dynamic. The strict gender roles that form the basis of hyper masculinity leave virtually no room for nuance, flexibility, or authenticity. A narcissistic man may feel internally split between his real self and the person he believes he absolutely must be to succeed and survive. He may secretly question his emotional reactions, his sexual feelings, or his basic ability to form deep connections. But instead of exploring these honest questions, he instantly buries them under many layers of forced performance. He becomes tragically trapped in a relentless cycle of proving his manhood, even as that very act erodes his fundamental sense of self. This creates a profound disconnect from his true identity. Instead of developing into a man who truly knows himself, he becomes a man who constantly hides from himself. The persona he presents to the world, confident, dominant, emotionally detached, is often the complete opposite of how he truly feels inside. Yet he clings to it desperately because it offers the illusion of safety. It manages to keep the fear at bay. It offers protection to the extremely fragile ego that lies hidden beneath the surface. Psychological projection is a key defense mechanism utilized by people with narcissistic traits and is crucial for how they manage inner conflict, deep shame, and identity confusion. At its heart, projection is the act of unconsciously attributing one's own unacceptable feelings, thoughts, or secret desires onto another person. It gives the individual a method to externalize what they are unable to face within themselves. For narcissistic men whose identities are meticulously constructed around total control, absolute perfection, and unwavering dominance, any internal emotional struggle, such as fear, inadequacy, or repressed desire, can feel intolerable. Rather than confronting these uncomfortable inner emotions, they unknowingly push them outward, accusing others of possessing the very traits they are struggling to deny in their own mind. Projection can show up in both subtle and overt ways. For instance, a narcissistic man who holds unconscious doubts about his own masculinity or sexual orientation may loudly ridicule others for being soft, weak, or effeminate. He may obsessively mock or shame any expression of emotional vulnerability in other men, or he might accuse others of having secret, bad motives as a way to divert attention from the insecurities he completely refuses to acknowledge in himself. By doing this, he creates distance from the aspects of his identity that feel threatening or confusing. This is rarely a calculated move. It is a primal psychological strategy fueled by deep fear and unconscious defense. Because narcissists tend to operate strictly from a place of ego preservation, any perceived threat to their self-image is viewed as a full-scale attack. Instead of honestly examining their own doubts or flaws, they construct elaborate narratives in which others become the problem. A narcissistic man may accuse his loving partner of being disloyal, not because she has shown any signs of it, but because he himself feels emotionally unstable and incapable of secure attachment. He might label another man as arrogant or insecure when in reality, he is describing traits he struggles with internally. Through projection, he essentially rewrites the emotional script to maintain his own sense of stability and superiority. What makes projection so incredibly damaging is that it actively prevents self-awareness. By consistently blaming others for their own inner turmoil, narcissistic men block the essential path to personal growth. They never allow themselves to sit with their fear long enough to understand it. Instead, they rapidly push it away, hide behind constant criticism, or surround themselves with people who will only reinforce their comforting illusions. Over time, this intense disconnect between their internal reality and the external narrative they construct can sadly lead to deeper emotional volatility and psychological confusion. They become trapped in a self-perpetuating loop of denial and projection, tirelessly defending against truths they are utterly unwilling to face. This defense mechanism is particularly common when dealing with issues of emotional need, sexuality, and identity. A narcissistic man who has been taught that emotional openness is a weakness might secretly crave intimacy, but feel disgusted by that desire. Instead of admitting to needing connection, he may harshly label others as clingy or needy. If he experiences same-sex attraction or admiration that fundamentally challenges his concept of masculinity, he might lash out at others with homophobic insults, not from genuine hatred, but as a knee-jerk way to silence the internal voice that is questioning his identity. Projection becomes his chosen tool for managing the profound discomfort that arises when the ego is at odds with deeper emotional truths. Underneath all of this behavior is one central element: fear, the overwhelming fear of being exposed, of being judged harshly, of failing to meet an impossible standard. The narcissistic man desperately clings to his projected narratives because the alternative, genuinely facing himself, is simply too painful. His projections are not random acts of aggression. They are meticulously built walls designed to keep his deep insecurities out of sight, even from himself. But those projections, no matter how convincing, never truly silence what lies buried beneath. The more intensely he projects, the more disconnected he becomes from his authentic self, and the further he drifts from the emotional freedom he secretly longs for. Some men with distinct narcissistic traits display a complex emotional pattern that is close to an obsession with other men's influence, physical physique. or social standing. This is rarely a feeling that is consciously acknowledged or openly discussed. It often resides deeply beneath the surface, masked by intense competition, comparison, or even open contempt. What appears on the outside to be rivalry or aggression is, at times, a displaced form of emotional fixation. It may not be sexual in its nature, but it undeniably carries great psychological weight, emotional charge, and intensity. These patterns starkly reveal a narcissistic man's severe internal conflict, his simultaneous admiration for traits in other men that he both profoundly envies and deeply resents. The narcissistic personality is solely constructed around a powerful image, dominance, and external validation. Such people are constantly scanning their surroundings to evaluate precisely where they rank in the social order. When a narcissistic man encounters another man who embodies something he wants to be, more admired, stronger, richer, he may become intensely fixated. That fixation is neither productive nor healthy. It may show up as obsessive competition, relentless comparison, or a powerful, persistent need to tear the other person down through criticism, gossip, or dismissive action.